Today's policy session of the Phoenix City Council for March 20th, 2018. I apologize for the late start. We had a very long executive session with a lot of legal cases to discuss, but that's the reason why we're starting a few minutes late. I appreciate everyone's patience. We are going to take items out of order for today's meeting. But first, let's do an executive session. Let's get that out of the way. Does someone have the call for an executive session? Councilman Stark, do you have a call for an executive session?
Yes, Mayor, in accordance with the properly posted notice and agenda, I move that the City Council, pursuant to the Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 38-431.02.A, meet in executive session on Tuesday, April 10th, 2018 at, I think we have 1 p.m., but we may move it up to noon. Is that correct? We don't know yet, so we'll keep it at 1. In the Central Conference Room, 12th floor of Phoenix City Hall, 200 West Washington, Phoenix, Arizona.
Thank you very much. Mr. Holm, does that cover us for both noon or 1? If we need to move it up to noon, should we clarify that it could be noon or 1 and we could post both so we're covered?
Mayor, members of the council, we have to move at this time for a specific time, and so we better stick with 1 o'clock.
Okay.
We can't do noon and maybe start late as a result?
Yes, we could do that.
Why don't we do it noon?
Do noon. Okay.
Is there a second? Is there a second? There is a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Mr. City Manager, do we have a report or a budget update at this time? None. Okay. So we'll move on to item number 3 and take that out of order. Item number 3 is an update on lots of activities that are happening at Rio Salado. And I think we have a great team here to talk about all of the projects as a preliminary matter. Long as I have been on this city council, that's a long time. The City of Phoenix has worked closely with our federal delegation for the improvement of Rio Salado, whether it be the river itself, where the Autobahn is now located, Trace Rios, some of the other amazing things that are going on there. We owe a huge debt of gratitude, by the way, to our friend, Congressman Ed Pastor, who helped us so often with the Army Corps and Engineer and with getting the appropriate level of appropriations so that we could advance with that. And now we are so lucky that Senator John McCain, our good friend, has made this an even higher priority. As long as I've been in office, he's always talked about his passion for the Rio Salado and improving the Rio Salado. And now he's really made this arguably his number one priority as a senator representing our community, and that is our good fortune. And he's brought together communities from around the valley, mayors and council members and leaders from around the valley to really try to fast forward positive improvement along the Rio Salado that we are so lucky to have in our community. So I won't steal any other thunder other than to say that we are in huge debt of gratitude to past delegations, especially Congressman Pastor, and now in particular to Senator John McCain for what he's doing to really advance this beautiful asset that we're lucky to have in our region, Rio Salado. I'll turn it over to Ms. Peters, our Deputy City Manager, who has been in charge of all things Rio Salado for a long time, too. She's been working on this stuff. You introduce our team that's here to talk about what's happening on the Rio Salado project and then upcoming activities. Ms. Peters.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about, give you all an update on the regional discussions regarding continued revitalization of the Rio Salado. As you mentioned, we do have a guest here with us today, and that is Austin Kennedy, Legislative Liaison in the Office of U.S. Senator John McCain.
Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
As well as my colleagues, Chris Mackey, Community Economic Development Director, and Clark Princell, Government Relations Manager, who's been working pretty actively on this as it's come along. So, by way of brief introduction, as you know, Phoenix has been working with the federal government since 1993 to address contaminated sites, enhance flood protection, and restore the ecosystem of the Salt River to provide needed habitat for Arizona wildlife, regional trails and recreation, and economic development opportunities beyond the banks of the riverbed. The City Council directed staff in 2018 federal agenda to engage with the federal delegation, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we have representatives of the Corps here with us today as well, and other stakeholders to explore ways to advance development of the Rio Salado with particular focus on repositioning the Rio Salado Oeste project, which has stalled in recent years. So let me show you what Senator McCain has brought us together to talk about, and that is this 45-plus mile revitalization of the Rio Salado project area. I apologize that it is very small, but I will show you that it stretches from the far east valley through the valley, including Phoenix, going west to Avondale, Goodyear, and Buckeye, but also including, importantly, the Salt River, Pima, Maricopa Indian Community, and the Gila River Indian Community. And so what the senator has done is essentially start this regional, massive intergovernmental coordination project so that we can talk about a vision for the revitalization of the entire corridor and make sure that there's connectivity and compatibility between the various projects that each of us are and have been working on. Quick reminder of projects completed to date in Phoenix. Much work has been done already. Beginning in 1999, Congress authorized matching federal construction funding for the initial Phoenix-Rio Salado 5-mile segment. To date, more than $118 million has been spent to complete that project. In 2000, funding was authorized for the Tres Rios 8-mile segment from 83rd Avenue to the Agua Fria River, including flood control levees and constructed wetlands that provide treatment of effluent from the 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant. Total estimated cost of the Tres Rios project has been approximately $232 million. Between those two projects, as we know, is the Rio Salado Oeste, which was authorized by Congress in 2007, but is still in pre-construction engineering and design phase. Completion of these projects is yielding economic development opportunities. And I'm going to pass down the control here to Chris Mackey, who will touch upon some of those in the Rio Salado Beyond the Banks area.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. From an economic development standpoint, we do see strong opportunities for new job creation in this employment corridor in working with our community. As we know from the past, we saw a significant number of employers leave this market and move out to greenfield sites where they built their buildings and had their employment. What we're seeing now, like we're seeing in other areas of the market, is really a trend of jobs moving back into the central city. They want to be near the transportation corridor. They want to be near transit. They want to be near that truly qualified workforce, and they want to be near Sky Harbor. There are a number of projects that are moving forward already or have just in recent, and I'll kind of point those out to give you a flavor of what's going on. When we look at the Kitchell development, it's about 200,000 square feet. They do have full buildings, a full building tenant that's moving into that space. We saw Wentworth Properties redevelop to 924,000 square feet. They have more than 1,000 jobs that are based out of that area along the river. That's 24th Street and the river bottom, and Kitchell is at 28th Street and the river bottom, just south of I-10. As you will remember, this council recently authorized staff to issue an RFP for the Del Rio landfill. I am pleased to tell you that more than 50 individuals attended the pre-proposal conference that we had recently, and that RFP does close at the end of April. So we are excited to bring something back to you for development on this city landfill. As light rail and the transit corridor move south and cross over the river, it'll bring a significant number of other great opportunities for our community, for amenities, for residential, for job creation, and others. As we look at this employment corridor with the land that's either underutilized or still to be developed, we anticipate seeing somewhere between 50 and 65,000 new jobs on additional land in this area at ultimate build-out. And with that, I will pass back to Karen.
Thank you, Chris. On March 30th, a week from Friday, Senator McCain and Arizona State University are convening all of the jurisdictions in the 45-mile area, along with other stakeholders, to celebrate the renewed Rio Salado effort and sign a statement of intent to cooperate and continue the conversation. Among other things, the group would communicate among all of the various agencies that touch the river in some way or another, participate in the potential creation of an advisory board to help advise projects as they go along, coordinating connectivity and compatibility, as I indicated earlier, research available funding opportunities, and of course pursue economic development and ecosystem restoration. I know that Austin would like to share a few words about the Senator's vision for this project. Go.
And Karen, before he speaks, Duke just walked in. I'm not sure if you wanted him up at the table or not from ASU.
I'll introduce Duke Ryder from Arizona State University, who has been part of the convening of this conversation, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions as we continue. But for now, Austin, go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing me to come present before you. As you know, this is Senator McCain's, as the Mayor alluded to, #1 priority in Arizona. He considers this a legacy for him, for the Phoenix area, and for the entire state, really. One of the things he has always said when people come and visit in DC is, this is something we need to do. And I think he's probably said that to all of you as you visited before. When he started this renewed passion last year, the first thing he did was look back at the history of how we started talking about the river in this light. And that started with ASU doing studies out of their programs. So the first thing he did was talk with Dr. Crow about this vision and the passion, and they shared a lot of interest in continuing in this. And since then, ASU's done tremendous work and poured a lot of resources into convening our stakeholders and looking at how they can contribute to research and the communities to move this forward. Obviously, this has been built on previous work by Congressman Ed Pastor here in Phoenix, and Tempe Town Lake, which was championed by then Harry Mitchell, then future Congressman Mitchell. And there are proof of concepts here that we have already that show we can turn our river into something for the community. Senator McCain truly believes that this is something we must approach on a regional basis, something that incorporates not just the cities and the municipalities, but the tribes and the state and the federal government. We've had tremendous interest from federal agencies back in DC that have some presence here, but they don't have anything like what other river revitalization programs has across the country. Senator McCain obviously has a history of working with federal agencies, but this is something unlike any other river revitalization program has done so far. The EPA, HUD, Army Corps of Engineers, which are here today, and EPA have all decided that they want to make this one of the #1 programs in our country. We've worked so far with a lot of stakeholders, but obviously Karen has alluded to a launch on the 30th, which we see that as the starting point, where from this point on, we're going to engage stakeholders on many different levels. This has to be community, top-down, bottom-up approach. Given all of the stakeholders involved, it's going to require a lot of time and coordination. Thankfully, ASU's played a large role in that, and I thought I'd hand it over to Duke to explain some of the role ASU's played so far.
Thank you, Austin. And Mayor, Council, happy to be here. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I thought we were later on the agenda. My apologies. The role of ASU is as a trusted convener. It was true that the conception for what you see today as Tempe Town Lake was a result of student and faculty efforts in 1966-67, and I think that's how the Senator came to approach Dr. Crow saying, I do recall that what I see out there today and the over $1 billion of investment surrounding it began as the conception of some students and some faculty looking at the potential of what was then a dry riverbed, and frankly, probably worse than that. A lot of things were in it that were disused items. And so as he looks at that asset out over it, and he joins us at ASU frequently, he said, why couldn't there be more of that? And as I recall, there was intended to be, and that surely was the case if you look at the bond votes back in the 80s. So we have enjoined that question, what could it be? And again, I think as a convener, and so working with Austin and everyone in the senator's office, with many of you, trying to get an understanding of what all the municipalities along the river, as well as the tribes, are already doing, and making sure that the whole becomes more than just the sum of the parts. We've been trying to organize a framework for this such that it can be carried on by generations long after us. The best thing that I think that we have done on this project to date are precedent studies that show how other equally ambitious urban projects, some involving rivers, but not all of them, how they were structured. And it typically is the same throughout, that there's an entity that carries the vision, there's an entity around the development, and there's an entity representing elected officials that help to authorize the whole thing. We have found consistently that structure, so we're trying to create something that can be handed off to others that resembles that. We've also looked at the funding of projects like this across the country that are comparable in size and scope. And we've actually sent Austin and his team to look at those projects, whether they're in Fort Worth or San Antonio or elsewhere, and we brought officials who've helped to realize those projects here. And lastly, we've looked at the benefits around how this should be a water positive project. It should not be a draw on our current system. It should be a model of how to treat water and do it well. It should clearly address community issues of all kinds and be a net positive in that regard. It should have economic development, and Chris and I have talked extensively about that. And lastly, we've looked at how all these other projects were funded. It depends a lot when they were initiated, whether there was considerable federal funding available, state funding, local, regional, whatever it might be. So we are doing a thorough examination of precedents for what will clearly be a multi-decade project that we can all get behind, and the letter of intent at the moment is simply a confirmation that we think there's something here worth investigating further. We are not coming forward with a design at this point that would be completely inappropriate, but we do think there's something worth considering here, and the university is happy to lend its good offices for the structuring of that initial conversation before the community takes that on, if it so chooses to do so, and helps to move it forward.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so you see the staff recommendation on the screen. We are hopeful that you will endorse the multi-jurisdictional statement of intent concept. It's still in development, but very much a statement that we intend to continue this conversation and working together as a region.
That's great. I have a few cards from folks in the community who would like to speak on this issue. I think it's best I'll hear from those folks first, and I'll turn to members of the council for comments or thoughts that they have, knowing that that's what the staff recommendation is, to keep moving forward on this very important project. How about gentlemen representing the organization that without them, nothing actually happens? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Ed DeMesa. Good to see you. We talk a lot. You guys get things done, so we appreciate it.
Mayor Stanton, member of the councils, good afternoon. Again, my name is Ed DeMesa. I'm the Chief of Planning for the Los Angeles District of the Corps of Engineers. On behalf of Colonel Gibbs, Commander for the Los Angeles District, we would like to affirm our strong support for the continued enhancement of the Rio Salado. The project that we have built along the Rio Salado Phoenix area has been the model for our partnership and our aquatic ecosystem restoration program, especially for the Los Angeles District. We also continue to support, and we have authorized together the projects for Tres Rios, for Rio Salado Oeste, and other projects. We support the continued reevaluation review of all these projects for the enhancements that we need today. We have been working closely with Karen, with Austin and your staff to be able to do that. We have begun to pursue through our budgetary programming process funding so that we could reinitiate the efforts, reviewing the projects and see if there are any enhancements for flood risk management, for ecosystem restoration and recreation, and other resources as needed. Again, thank you so much, and thank you so much for your support.
Thank you very much for all the great work that you and the Army Corps of Engineers have already done here, and the work you're going to do to help us complete these important projects. And with the Senator's help and others in Congress, we'll make sure you get the resources. I think it's so important that you get the resources. These projects are really, really important. The work we've done here in the city of Phoenix with Tres Rios and some of that, just an amazing riparian environment that's been created there. We probably don't do enough in Phoenix to brag about the work that's already been done, in addition to talking about the work that is yet to be done. How about, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Next speaker will be our friend Cheryl Lombard from Valley Partnership, in support of us moving forward with this partnership. Cheryl, good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Cheryl Lombard, President and CEO of Valley Partnership. I'm here on behalf of our member entities, 350 of them, to support the Rio Salado project, and we encourage you to sign the statement of intent. In terms of this exciting opportunity, it has the potential to bring economic opportunity, but also the environmental benefits that you've been speaking about today. Innovative river projects across the U.S. Bring not only value to our local economies, but it enhances the quality of life. So with that, I want to encourage you and thank you for your vision, and look forward to working with you.
Great, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is our friend Victor Vidalis, also known as the mayor of South Mountain Village. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Just want to also express my support for this vision and for this work. For over 18 years, I've been involved in this project in some way with Rio Salado Beyond the Banks, and you've seen this mature and have come to life. You know, over the past 44 years of my life in South Phoenix, it was a dry riverbed and a dumping ground, and so today, our kids are breaking the cycle of poverty, learning about science and STEM projects with Audubon, which is a board that I served on for 10 years, including the national board, who has done a lot of these national projects throughout the U.S. To bring the value of natural habitat to our youth. We all know that if kids don't experience nature, if they don't understand the value of water, if they don't understand the value of land, if they don't understand the value of air, then they'll never have the ability to fight and protect these assets that we so badly need. So I am hopeful that this vision will become a reality. I also know from an economic development standpoint that it's very difficult to redevelop projects. Most of you know a project we called Plaza de las Culturas, which we worked on for 4 years with a national community development financial institution. That was very difficult to get off the ground, and without these federal partnerships, without these larger partnerships, really can never happen. So we're really hopeful that you'll approve today this great vision and will participate so that it benefits our city for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor, very much for being here and your leadership on so many important issues of the city of Phoenix. Now I'll turn to members of the city council. Do they have any questions or comments? Councilman Nowakowski, please.
It sounds like a great project, but I represent a big portion of the Rio Salado and basically the Rio Salado Oeste, and I just got briefed this morning on the project. I was just wondering, how long has the staff been working on this project and meeting about this project? And if you can give me a little update on that.
Mayor, Councilman Nowakowski, as Duke mentioned, ASU and Senator McCain conceived this idea last spring, but it wasn't until, I believe, the fall that we started to talk about what we could do together. And so I think I've been to 3 or 4 of these working group meetings to talk about what we have done already in the river, to explain to the broader group what the Rio Salado is, what the Tres Rios project is. We've done tours at Tres Rios and talk about the possibilities at Rio Salado Oeste. So we have been engaged in those conversations.
So Karen, it's been about since the fall of this year or last year? Or?
The fall of 2017, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And one of the things that concerns me of is that I've talked to some of my other colleagues, and they've heard rumblings out there, but they've never been briefed until today. So I just really want to thank you, Mayor, for putting this as a policy to actually bring this to light, because we've been getting a lot of questions about this. And one of the questions to Mr. Austin from Senator McCain's office is, what type of resources would the senator bring to this project, and what kind of networking would he help us to make sure that this happens?
Well, one of the great things that came out of, as Duke mentioned, precedent study was access to a partnership. It's an urban waters federal partnership, which 15 federal agencies are part of that work on other river restoration projects across the country. The goal of us in being included in such a partnership would to be have access and a designation of sorts from the federal government that would include a full-time, what is called an ambassador to the project. This person would be able to, or group or entity would be able to navigate federal resources, help with grants, help with all sorts of things that could apply to the entire region that we might not have had access to before. That includes, agencies such as, Housing and Urban Development that can help with things along the banks. That includes the Environmental Protection Agency that can help with brownfields. That includes the Army Corps of Engineers. That includes FEMA. It includes a lot of different agencies that have a nexus point on the river, but don't always collaborate well. And so one of the things we look to do and bring as a resource for all the communities as part of this project is better access to the federal government that we didn't have before.
Thank you very much. And a question for Mr. Duke from ASU is, I know that you've been having meetings, and South Phoenix is a very special area in the city of Phoenix with a lot of history and a lot of roots. And some of those communities, which we have a large Latino, African American, Asian community out there that take very much pride of not just South Phoenix, but especially the river and the banks of the river. I was just wondering, I heard that there's 2 meetings, one at the new law school and the other one at Liberty Wildlife. What were some of the comments from the community, and were there community at large at those meetings?
Councilman Nowakowski, thank you for bringing that up. And as my friend Victor Vidalis behind me knows very well, he was the first one to introduce me to South Phoenix when I arrived here in 2003 and opened my eyes to that community. You reference a couple of meetings, and one in particular that we had at Liberty Wildlife, which could be 6 weeks ago. We have a sort of kitchen cabinet of people, which Cheryl participates on, people recommending to us because they know the area well and say, you should meet with certain constituencies. And so we had a meeting at Liberty Wildlife of NGOs in the area, those nonprofits who care about the environment, water, whatever their particulars might be. So that session was dedicated to that group, and we had community members, as you would know, from South Phoenix representing various organizations there. And to be frank, they did very much communicate what you're communicating now. We have been here a long time. We've seen plans come and go. We care passionately about this place. And we heard that message loud and clear. It was delivered very politely, and I think we responded in kind. We realized that this is going to be a very long-term process. We want to be respectful of it. We're not in charge of it, but we're happy to make sure that those who follow after us make sure that the convenings are generous in nature, they're inclusive, and we're responsive to the very things that I'm sure that you're concerned about. So we're listening, and some of our most profound notes came from that particular meeting, where surely there were some in the room who'd said, the number one issue you could address here would be social justice issues related to this project. And they're not wrong. We could have another group meeting where people might say, no, it's water. And others might say, you know, there are a lot of transportation possibilities here, or housing, or whatever it might be. Everyone's right. And so what we're doing is simply totaling up the things that we're hearing that a project like this could address, and how we should get after that in the following year. So that was a particularly effective meeting, I think, for us to hear, and hopefully for the people who took the time to come to it, to have their voices heard.
You know, I think it's a great project. I mean, I would love to connect you with some of those community leaders that are out there. You know, Victor's one of them, but there's many other Victors out there in the world. We have, you know, the African-American pastors that are very active out there. We have all of our Asian American community that just 20 years ago, when you used to drive down Baseline Road, all those beautiful flowers, and you know, and then we have our Latino and other cultures that are out there. So I would like to connect you to those individuals. So I asked staff just really quickly to pull up all the neighborhood organizations within a mile radius, right? And basically, there's about 79 different organizations that we have documented. This is block watch groups, neighborhood associations that we can connect you to. And I think it's really important because a lot of times we lose focus on the Rio Salado just being that little pocket of South Phoenix. I mean, we got Levine that's just growing by leaps and bounds, and Estrella is also an area that I cover that has a lot of voices out there and a lot of growth. So, you know, how can we just make sure that all these individuals have a vested interest and that they have an input on this future plan? I mean, it's not going to happen within the next 5-10 years, but it's a plan that you were saying that the Tempe Lake took a long time. So I think it should be an ongoing conversation, and I'll be very supportive as long as there's some kind of security that we're going to end up having these voices of interest involved in the process somehow, some way. And thank you all.
All right, thank you very much. Other members of the council, comments, questions about the proposal? My impression is at this point, at least for City of Phoenix, we're not doing anything differently than we've already been authorized to do by this city council, particularly as it relates to RFPs and some economic development opportunity, as it relates to moving forward with the projects that we partner with the Corps of Engineers. I think really what the message from the senator is, let's try to, as much as possible, coordinate with what's going on with other cities along the whole 45-mile area. But each city is going to keep its own distinct priorities. Tempe's doing their thing with regard to the river. Our strategy and priority generally been to create this kind of riparian habitat, and we've been hugely successful in doing so, and need to promote that more than we probably have because it really is a very successful project that's happened so far. Councilman DeCiccio, and then we'll go start.
Thank you, Mayor. And one of the things that, and I want to thank Councilman Nowakowski for his leadership in this area in particular, because a big part of it is his district and all the work that all of you have put into this. One of the things that Councilman Nowakowski had mentioned was, what happened in Tempe and others. I grew up there, and I remember what happened in Rio Salado. It was a place for vagrants. Prostitution was there. It was drugs. And it took a long time to do that. You had the vision of people like Harry Mitchell, Bill Lopiano. Those were the mayors that really drove that. And this is exactly what the city of Phoenix needs to be doing in this area. Today, you can look at it and think, wow, that looks kind of cool, but it's the vision for the future that you're providing today. And if it isn't for this type of direction and this type of movement for any city, then you'll never have anything. It just takes time, and these things are not easily put together. I do have to mention the Audubon Society is out there. I don't remember hearing about that, but my kids just did the tour with them and through their school, and it's just an amazing project. And I think that if individuals were just to take a little bit of time and walk along there and see what's provided today, they're able to see what the future is going to look like in a grander scale. So I think this is the perfect place for the city of Phoenix to be. This is the type of vision that we need to be looking at. And it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. This is not a 5, 10, or even a 15-year proposal, what's happening here. Because remember, that's how long it took Tempe. They made their investment. Matter of fact, which is even more interesting, I was able to take a tour. I knew the engineer who was designing the original dam. That was the rubber dam that they've changed now to a steel dam. But we took a tour through there, and it was just fascinating to see what people were thinking and doing at the time. And it was interesting even to the level of criticism that was geared toward that. Now it's considered one of the hottest spots probably in the country State Farm just sold their building for almost $1 billion. That's one of the most expensive sales, other than ASU giving away $125 million, which was a shocker to me. I don't know why you guys do what you do, but you guys give away so much money. It's a shocker. But you don't need to do that. They would have came anyways. But that's another issue. And Cheryl, I know we're talking about giblets, but this is something else too. This is another multi-billion-dollar giveaway over time. But either way, the proposals that you're doing and the things you're working on are just going to take time. The federal level's there. But one of the things, Phoenix is the dominant, and it is, I think, the mayor's brilliant idea is to work with the other cities. But if they can't, just do what Tempe did. You can go at it alone and make it work, put the money and time investment in there, and work with the federal government in particular with it. Thanks, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much. Councilwoman Stark?
Thank you. Putting on my planner hat, planning geek that I am, I'm really excited about this. I actually took a class from Professor Elmore, who really had the vision and the dream at ASU. I'm not going to tell you when I took that class because then you could figure out my age. But I think this will be very exciting. It really will be an economic development driver. And I think I'm jealous of Councilman Nowakowski and Councilwoman Gallego because it's in your district. This is fabulous. But I did have one quick question. On participation in creating the potential central advisory body, do we know what that looks like? Will there be people from each jurisdiction, and would that include Maricopa County? Because I think the flood control district might play some value, it would be a valuable resource.
Look, the advisory board is really in its very early infancy. I don't think anybody has a picture of what it would include, but I will say that the county flood control district has been a part of presenting all the projects that are happening in the project area, and so they're very much at the table.
Thank you very much. Councilwoman Gallego, please.
Water in the desert inspires big thinkers and a lot of creativity, so this is going to be an exciting project. As one of the council people who represents the Rio Salado in Phoenix, I'm thrilled that Senator McCain has chosen this as his legacy project. It really is the kind of big project that we can build community around and remember a great leader, so please give him our thanks. It is also fitting that this river is so much part of the history of Phoenix. Phoenix is here because of our river system, and it is an important asset that many people point out to us regularly we don't celebrate or take advantage of often enough, and so I'm hopeful that this is the convening that we need to really bring people together and celebrate the river for all that it offers us and all that it has already given our community. This project has really brings together many things that have been happening already. Chris Mackey talked about the great job growth we've already seen along the Rio Salado, and it's been wonderful to see how many people have found jobs in this area that have changed their lives just in the last 4 years. There's real enthusiasm in the private sector about what's happening in the area, and it's so close to so many great amenities, whether it be the airport or one of the most important infrastructure projects going on in our community right now, the South Central Light Rail. I want to recognize Councilman Nowakowski, who's really been taking the lead as we do the South Central Light Rail about transit-oriented development and making sure we take full advantage of that infrastructure investment as we move forward. And the councilman just got some new resources in partnership with the rest of us in that area, I think this month at one of our council meetings. As I've talked to my constituents about this area, they've talked a lot about the natural resources, investing in environment, and how much there already is to offer, the great natural environment, and just the really impressive wildlife you can find in the middle of our city. What a lucky amenity that so few cities have. We've also talked a lot about jobs and housing, and then one thing that comes up, particularly in areas like Del Rio, is recreation. The city did a great community stakeholder process with support from the federal government about what we wanted to see in that area, and families was a theme that came up over and over again, and bringing together people in community building. We hear that over and over again, and we haven't always had the financial resources to make it happen. So partnering with the federal government, the county, hopefully the state, are really exciting. You talked about innovative new financing tools, And I think with Senator McCain's leadership, we might be able to bring some tools to the table that we don't have right now to be able to get this done. A project of this magnitude needs great leadership, and so we're lucky to have the senator leading the way. I certainly would love to be involved in the stakeholder process as much as possible. I think Councilman Nowakowski and I would both love to be involved in some kind of advisory board or our districts. This could be one of the most important things happening in our districts. I certainly hope it will be, and we look forward to supporting the work that's going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Williams?
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked about and dreamed about this for decades. I can remember conversations going clear back when I was on a village planning committee on how this could happen. And we have made some accomplishments that I'm very proud of, but I've always been kind of frustrated because we're moving at a very small snail's pace. I am so glad and appreciative that Senator McCain has decided to really help us make this become a reality. Water is such an issue in Arizona, and I think this will really send a message not only to everybody who lives here, who works here, but around the world, that we believe in water, we preserve it in many different ways, and this can be a signature piece. And I am so delighted ASU is leaped in and going to have a full partnership with this project. I am, again, like Councilwoman Stark, very envious of the two council people who have this in their district. But I think this is such a tremendous project that everyone in this city and everyone in this valley will be very proud of it, very appreciative, and very supportive of it. And I think you might even be able to do some local fundraising just from residents who believe if they've went to the Audubon Center, if they've seen our pelican flock, I've never heard a word, anything negative. I only see smiles and how great those projects are. So I think there are many opportunities and the potential is absolutely unlimited. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Is the Army Corps of Engineers going to start a GoFundMe account to help fund these projects?
Yeah, it may work.
It might work. Councilman Valenzuela.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Kennedy, first of all, how's the senator?
He's doing much better.
Good.
They won't, his immune system is improving, and he plans on traveling back to DC soon.
Okay, well, we have well wishes and thoughts, prayers, and a great deal of love and respect for the senator. Speaking for myself personally, my family, and I think many, many people from our city. So I had the privilege and the responsibility of traveling to Washington, D.C. to represent the city of Phoenix at the National League of Cities Conference. This might have been last year, the year before. I try to go every year, like many of my colleagues, to represent the city. And on that particular trip, I had an opportunity to sit with Senator McCain in his office, and this topic dominated the discussion. This and a couple of other topics in downtown Phoenix, parking issues as an example. Here I am thinking, you know, this world leader, and certainly one of our leaders here in the United States, is focused on literally trying to help us toward world peace. And he knew of some of the parking issues we had just a couple of blocks away from this very building. And he spoke very highly of many people who are in this room, including you, Victor Fidelis. And I gotta tell you, there's only one Victor. And there are a lot of great leaders in our community, but we are fortunate to have you, sir, in your drive. I remember the first time you and I talked, this topic dominated the discussion. Like you, Victor, I actually grew up in this city and in part of my childhood in that particular area. I went to one of the public schools I attended was actually in the area. This is big, and it's far beyond any one or two council districts or even the city of Phoenix. This is something that's incredible for our state. If we want to talk about the city of Phoenix, any world-class city must invest in infrastructure and education. And this is where those worlds meet. It's this type of a project. And, you know, Victor, you talked about water and getting kids to, our students to care about these types of elements and the type of, obviously, the type of infrastructure that comes forth. And we have great plans and goals for this area. This could be a tech hub. It could continue to expand. And as we see downtown Phoenix and the tech boom continue to expand, we see it going north. It's certainly going to come south, and it'll also hit this area as well. This is exciting. You know, it's going to take ASU. It's going to take the city of Phoenix, the county. It's going to take you know the federal government. It's going to take all of us. And there are so many reasons, I guess, to just keep this on the shelf. So many reasons to allow this plan to collect dust. So many obstacles, so many roadblocks. Think of that kid that we're trying to convince to learn about the power of water so that they would take care of that type of infrastructure and resource moving forward. Think of our city and our state as we move forward. This is a legacy project, not just for our senator, but you know, as we continue to grow, this is what's going to truly put a place like Phoenix, Arizona on the map. We're the 5th largest city in the country with more land mass than Los Angeles, and we are still about 50 years or more younger than most major cities in America. What do we want to be when we grow up? What type of culture? What are we going to, you know, what are going to be our landmarks? And we have great natural landmarks, but this is something that we could work on creating and building together. So rather than watch it collect more dust, it's important that we start. It's important that we get going, and I couldn't be more supportive. And you know, thank you all, including our Valley Partnership, Cheryl, everyone who's come out to speak today on this. The real question is, how do we continue to now galvanize the momentum? How do we actually get this thing going? I'm interested in doing that. So thank you, and fully supportive.
Thank you very much, Councilman. Any additional comments by members of this council? Councilman Nowakowski, please.
Hey, Chris, we need to follow up with Austin on the parking situation for downtown Phoenix.
I've got it.
All right.
All right, so I don't know, should I turn to one of the council members who represents the Rio Salado area in our city? Should I turn to our former planner who's geeked out on this project? I mean, who wants to make the motion on this? Councilman Nowakowski, please.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve staff's recommendation with one little twist, that we make sure that we include communities of interest in the planning of it.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Look forward to working very much. Austin, give our best to our great senator. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you all
Thanks
so much.
Thanks for coming out. Thanks, Duke, as well. All right, next on our agenda, we're going to go back in regular order, will be our legislative agenda. Clark, stay right there. All right, Ms. Peters, how are we doing?
Well, so far so good, Mayor and members of the council. We are here to give you an update regarding the status of the state legislative session that's still underway. I will introduce our team again. Of course, Frank McCune, Government Relations Director, Clark Princell, and John Wayne Gonzalez, Government Relations Manager. So take it away, Frank.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We are starting. Today is the 69th day of the second regular session of the 53rd Legislature. The last week to hear bills in regular committee until they go to appropriations. And just as a reminder, we operate primarily in our first phase, in our first viewing of the bills under the 4 principles, and that's opposing unfunded mandates, the button's slow today, preserving local control, protecting shared revenues, and protecting water resources. There we go. And today we are going to start with looking at 2 bills that require council action, and Clark Prinsell is going to review those for your consideration.
So the 2 bills, the first is HB 2166, Vehicle Fees and Alternative Fuel VLT. This bill would create a highway safety fee to be collected on every vehicle registration application, which would fund DPS's Highway Patrol Fund. The current practice is for much of the Highway Patrol Fund to be funded with revenue from the Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF. And this bill would also require vehicle license tax, or VLT, to be collected on all alternative fuel vehicles. The second bill is SB 1147. This would allow the Maricopa Board of Supervisors to conduct a countywide election to approve the renewal and extension of the county's half-cent excise tax. And this would require the tax to be levied at the current rate for a 20-year tax term beginning on January 1st of 2026.
And you're recommending that we support both these items. Are there any questions on HB 2166 or SB 1147? Councilman DeCiccio, please.
So let's cover each one of those individually. The 1147 just basically allows them the ability to do that, correct? If I remember the law.
Exactly, to extent.
And then, again, the 2166, the alternative VLT, does what?
So it would do 2 things. So the first it would do is it would create a revenue source to fund DPS. Currently, the majority of the DPS budget is funded with a sweep from HERF. This would create a add-on to the your vehicle registration that would be used to pay for that. And then in addition to that, it would charge a VLT to alternative fuel vehicles.
And Mayor, the reason I'm going to oppose that, generally, it sounds good, but the problem is that there was a law passed several years ago dealing with 3/4 votes on any tax increase. So because they're calling this an administrative fee, which I don't agree with, I mean, they should just call it what it is. I think philosophically and theoretically, I think that this is wrong for the city to support that type of thing. So I'll support 1147, but I'm going to oppose 2166 because I believe it goes contrary to the law.
All right, any additional,
even though, I mean, contrary to the voters' intent.
Any other questions? By the way, who's the sponsor in 2166? Who's the sponsor?
Campbell's the sponsor in the House, and in the Senate, it's Senator Worsley.
Thank you. Councilman Williams.
Do you have any idea what the estimate would be for the increase in the vehicle fees for an average person?
If DPS's budget was to stay the same as it is this year, moving forward, it would be an $18 fee. The DPS budget currently is $135 million.
And how much do they take from the city of Phoenix, from the HERF fund?
In FY18, they would take $83.7 million from the HERF fund.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions, Councilwoman?
Since we are going to be talking about our city budget later, could you give us an update on House Bill 2479, digital goods and services?
Oh, real quick. Let's act on these, and then we'll
Okay.
go, yeah. So any questions about 2166 or 1147? And then whatever action we take on that, then we'll take other questions folks have on other. Okay, is there a motion on 2166?
Move approval of support?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. I think it's fair to say we are, as a body, likely agnostic as to what they do with the VLT. Just don't take HERF anymore. The reason why we would be supportive of this is that it sends a strong message that the rating of the HERF fund has significantly hurt our ability to improve our roads and keep policy priorities as council. So it's not necessarily support of the VLT, but if that's the vehicle that allows them to not raid local funds for road and transportation, it's worth it. So that would be at least my rationale for supporting it. Any other comments or questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed. So we now support that bill. How about a motion on SB 1147?
Move approval.
I will second this. I think this is extremely important that we get working on this. When we talk about our streets, we talk about our freeways and the congestion. All our transportation has issues in this valley, and this is the only way we can work together to make it happen. So I'm very excited about it. I encourage people to get involved.
Any other comments on 1147? It's important to note that that would only, it would go through the county board of supervisors only if it ends up being an extension of the existing Prop 400 resources. If for some reason MAG would request a different amount, it would still have to go back to the state legislature. And obviously, we want to, as we go through that planning process, we want all ideas on the table of how we can improve transportation in our region. Any questions or comments on 1147? There was a motion. Or was there a motion? There was. There was a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Okay. Did you have other votes you needed by this council, or are you just going to give an update?
Now we want to focus on 4 bills that are negatively impacting the city, and we want to just highlight them for you. We've talked to them.
You don't need action by this council on those?
Not on these, but we want to just re-highlight them for you.
Okay, real quick. I'm going to hand over to Councilwoman Gallego then about the particular bill that she was interested in.
And they are it is part of the 4 that we're going to address because it is a big issue. So we're going to hand that over to John Wayne Gonzalez, our Manager of State Affairs. And if you want to start
Sure.
with that.
Mayor and Council, good afternoon. So the question was, first, just let you know that in the City Council report you received, you will notice that we did have mobile food vendors in your report. But based on some of the feedback we received from council members, they wanted an update on some of the other items that we have already had briefed the council on at these meetings. So these are the 4 items that we have added to just give an update on things we've already worked through. Now, to go to the question about digital goods, Senate Bill 1392 and House Bill 2479. As a reminder, this is the bill that takes certain categories or digital good categories that we are currently receiving revenues on, and it eliminates the ability to collect on those current revenues. As you'll recall, in the past City Council report, we saw a financial impact. That financial impact has been estimated at a conservative amount of initial $9.6, $9.7 million. But with the change in the business model and the environment, it could definitely go up. Currently, the Senate bill is the bill that got to the floor of the Senate, but it has been halted in the process. It was waiting for a fiscal note from the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. That note has been issued, and they do indicate that they do anticipate losses to the state. They didn't have an exact number, but I understand they are still working on getting a number to the state. But they have indicated in their fiscal note, which I have here, that they do also believe the cities will lose monies as well. So right now, I guess the answer is the issue right now is at a standstill in the state Senate. Since it's waiting for Senate Committee of the Whole action, it could always pop up again. But there are many senators who have concern with the potential impacts to the state as well. And that's the update on that bill. If there are any other questions on this issue.
Questions on that bill? All right.
So then I'll roll real quickly through the other bills that are just updates. So mobile food vendors and state licensure. So what happened was there was a bill introduced that is trying to allow the state to regulate food trucks. That's the intent. And we tried to definitely, through a stakeholder process, work with other folks to try to help make that happen. But at the 11th hour, this language does not work for the city of Phoenix. And to let you know what staff believes would happen is it would definitely change what the city is doing right now and enable when complaints come in with trucks that are parked on private property for a long period of time, trucks that are parked in the right-of-way that they can't do that. The background check process, and we do that because they're serving the community, and we do criminal background checks for ice cream trucks as well as for the food trucks. That's in question of how we can get that information to make sure that those vendors qualify to be there. It has some zoning issues. So there's a lot of problems with this bill, and so it just preempts us in all these areas, and therefore, this is why this bill is coming late, because we were hopeful that we could have language that worked for them and for us, and it just at the 11th hour does not do so. So if there are no questions on that.
Any questions?
Then the other bill is House Bill 2333.
Councilman?
This is on
You
the
have a
digital bill you're talking about,
The 2333 or the previous one, food truck?
the 1392 and the home-based, well, no, that's it. That's fine.
Okay.
I think he's getting to that one, yeah, go ahead.
So House Bill 2333, next on the list is, again, we've passed City Council report. This is the bill that the language would, similar to the food truck issue, that staff believes would definitely make it much more difficult for the city to respond to complaints from residents who report nuisance with noise, with trash, with parking issues when people are starting to run businesses out of their home. And so this bill right now did not get a hearing this week in Senate Government Committee, meaning that the bill is more than likely dead unless there is another vehicle that's found on this issue. But this is one where, you know, a lot of residents went out and I know for a fact testified, wrote emails, made phone calls. A lot of Phoenicians were out there very concerned about this bill. But as of now, it appears that this bill is not going to move at this point forward. And then, if there are no questions, the final bill on the list,
please,
is just an update on 2604. This is the bill that is being run that would require political subdivisions that experience a 25% decrease in voter turnout from one of the two prior elections to consolidate elections to the same dates as the statewide election. This bill is actually scheduled for a hearing tomorrow in the Senate Government Committee at 2 o'clock. And it continues to move. As of prior to this meeting, we did not see any new amendments as of now to the bill. But that's where that bill is at right now.
All right, good.
Process.
And I think a thorough discussion of that bill is the reason why we got late started with this meeting.
And Mayor and Council, that's the only information we have to provide at this point, unless there are
Mayor?
other questions on other issues.
Councilman Zizio, please.
I just want to give him the chance to finish on 1392. I think I provided some language to an amendment that could have worked and addressed your concerns. How come that didn't work out? It was a deal I worked out with Maria Sims, the legislator.
And then Mayor and Council member, to remind the Council, staff was asked for language to look at what would take care of City of Phoenix's concerns. And you'll remember that the finance staff was able to deliver language that they worked on with legal that would take care of our concerns. And we provided that information to all your council offices, including you, Mr. Mayor, and your office as well.
And the language I provided did not, is what you're saying?
No, sir. We have not heard anything on from any representative or from any policymaker at the state as to their reaction to our language.
To your language, but
Well,
I'm
to
talking
the
about
City
the
of
language.
Phoenix language that was provided to your offices.
Right, because I provided language I think would have addressed those concerns.
Yes, if it's the same language that you had requested that staff look at, we have not at this point received any feedback from anybody at the legislature as to what their take is right now on that language.
Other questions, comments? You have anything else for us?
One
Please, Clark.
clarification.
Mayor, Councilman Williams, I just wanted to clarify on the vehicle fees. The amount of money that's swept from HERF to pay for DPS at the statewide is the $83.7 million. I will get a number on how much of that HERF money would have gone to the city if it wasn't swept.
Well, it sounded a lot better when they were 3.
I had misunderstood the question, I'm sorry.
You.
Any other comments or questions? Council members, any particular bills that you want to talk more about? Anything else? All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the report. Appreciate it. Next on the agenda, we'll now turn to our city manager. He has his proposed 18-19 trial budget. As everyone on the dais knows, I want to make sure the public understands, this is the beginning of our budget process, our annual budget process here at the City of Phoenix. Our city manager proposes a trial budget. We're not going to take any votes on this today because it's his proposed budget. And then we go out in the community and held dozens of public hearings on our, this proposed trial budget. Hear the community's comments of what they like, don't like, what they want to see more of, or even sometimes less of in the budget. Inevitably, changes are made to this budget before a final vote of the city council. Mr. City Manager, when will that final vote likely be?
Mayor, the council actually votes a couple times on it. The first one of the votes will be May, I believe, 22nd.
Okay.
And then there are 2 further votes in June.
There's a beginning of about a 3-month process for our city budget. I'll hand it over to you, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. We are going to actually go to the CIP first. With me today is Jeff Barton and Chris Fazio from the Budget and Research Department. We'll start with the big pictures here, which is the capital improvement program, which is a preliminary 5-year look at that. It also is available for comment on the website, and then the council votes on that in June, I believe. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Barton, Mr. Fazio.
Mayor, members of the council, good afternoon. Today's presentation on the preliminary CIP will be a very brief overview. We come back to you with the final CIP later in June. So just by way of overview, before I turn it over to Chris for the much more detailed information, the 5-year CIP that we're talking about today is a $5.2 billion program. Year 1 of that CIP, which is ultimately the only year that you ultimately adopt when we get to that portion of our budget process, is about $1.5 billion. And that reflects about 1,219 total projects. And as always, we continue to find ways to leverage both state and federal funding in addition to city resources to carry out this CIP. And again, this CIP is important not just from the things that it builds and that we construct and maintain, but it's also very good for the local economy because it does create and sustain local jobs. I believe each of you have a copy of our entire CIP document at this point. It's about a 230-page document, so it's not small, and it is a lot of detail. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris, who will walk you through more of the detail.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. The CIP, as has been the case in previous years, is funded primarily by restricted operating and capital funds. The general fund as a percentage is a fairly small component, but we'd like to draw your attention to that figure. The $66 million that you see in the bottom left of this chart is actually a substantial increase over previous years. And what that really reflects and represents is an increased level of investment in our general fund supported city facilities, rehabilitation, major maintenance items. Looking at the CIP by program, the water, transit, aviation, streets, and wastewater programs as a group comprise about 90% of the total program size. So the emphasis is on infrastructure. And to briefly highlight some projects that are significant to the community, the CIP includes the city's investment in water rehabilitation and replacement, water main rehabilitation and replacement, new and expanded major streets and bridges, street repairs and modernizations, 3 light rail projects, the South Central, Metro Center, and Capitol light rail extensions, the historic preservation program, and drainage infrastructure projects, including Rawhide Wash, Durango Regional Conveyance Channel, 27th Avenue and Olney Avenue, and the 19th Avenue and Dobbins Road projects. Stage 2 of the SkyTrain, construction of a new South Concourse of Terminal 4, a new community center at Cesar Chavez Park, a new fire station at I-17 and Joe Max, a Latino Cultural Center, as well as the Rio Salado Oeste project that you heard about earlier. So as we mentioned, today's item is only for informational purposes, but we'll come back in June for formal adoption steps, and then in July for property tax adoption. The full preliminary CIP document, including the project level details, available on the city website. With that, we can take your questions.
Mayor? Oh.
Yes, Councilman.
One, when we're talking about our capital improvement, the one thing that I'm hearing from the public relentlessly is the condition of our roads. Our roads are terrible. If you look at them today, they tell you the financial condition of the city of Phoenix. There isn't one road in the city of Phoenix that is not a disaster, that is horrible, that is a mess, that is an embarrassment. And the amount of monies that need to go into our road systems needs to be significant. And what I'm telling people is look at one road, you pick the road, and you will see the financial condition of the city of Phoenix. Again, the roads are an embarrassment to the city of Phoenix. They're terrible for economic development, they're terrible for our quality of life, and they're a safety hazard. I really think that we need to focus and put as much money as possible in right now repairing these roads, fixing them, getting them done, because that is what people see when they come into our city. And the people that live here deserve better.
Thank you, Councilman. I have an annual tradition about talking about flood control in the capital improvement plan. So again, we have, unfortunately, needs in the billions and limited resources, and I would just love it if we could look as creatively as possible, because the needs continue and we seem to be having more and more extreme weather events, and we still had a backlog to begin with before we had the historic floods in 2014. I do think we have a good story to tell on streets. When most of these council members were elected, I think it was about every 65 years that we were touching a street, and now it's on average every 10, so that is a significant improvement, and it's certainly thanks to the voters being willing to invest in Proposition 104, now called Transportation 2050. So I now am at the point where I have constituents complain we have too much construction in certain areas, and that they would like us to make sure they always have a path where there's no construction to be able to get home. You are just looking for comments on the CIP right now, and then we'll go to general budget comments. And there's just some projects that aren't in here, particularly around safe routes to school, that I may talk offline with our streets department director about, that are real priorities for ours. But I do want to celebrate the Cesar Chavez Community Center. That's been a long-time priority for Councilman Nowakowski and myself. We hear so often about the needs for our young people in that quickly growing part of our community, Levine, and it will be something that our city will really celebrate, so thank you. It was not projected to be in the budget when I joined the city council, and it's wonderful that we now have it in there moving forward, and certainly something to celebrate, particularly for our youngest residents and our older adults who are both been telling us about those needs, so thank you.
Mayor, Councilman Gallego, I think that illustrates a great point about the importance of the 5-year capital improvement program. As you mentioned, 5 years ago, you and Councilman Nowakowski began the discussion about let's get this in the CIP, let's get this in the CIP, and through that feedback, which is what this is about, it is now in the CIP. And so that sort of feedback is really important, the priorities of your communities as we're able to fit them into our capital improvement program, and we certainly have heard the issue about drainage as well.
Councilman Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. I am very appreciative of the significant community projects. I know you listen to me chirp about those all the time, but what I really appreciate is that little sliver of 66 million that you're going to provide city-owned property upgrades and maintenance. I think we forgot about that in the last 10 years, and it's very important. We learned it through a hard lesson, but I think it's very important that we focus on that. And I know that you have set up a new process to evaluate every city-owned building or structure so that we never fall into that again. 66 is probably a small percentage of what we really need if we'd rehab all of our buildings immediately. But I think that it's important that you've started, that you're doing a process to evaluate, you'll have priorities, and recognize that we need to do this more and more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you much. Other comments? All right, so there's no, obviously, action today on the 5-year capital improvement program. That will be voted on as part of our regular budget process. Now move on to the city manager's proposed trial budget.
Thank you, Mayor. And members of the council, as you know, for the past year and really intensely in the past 4 months, we've talked, but actually more importantly, we've acted to close a potential budget deficit predicted a year ago to be between $43 and $64 million. And I want to thank each of you for your leadership and each of our city employees, represented by many of our department heads here today, who responded to the challenge you laid out for us as a city council. As you know, the city manager's trial budget is the first pass at determining how to allocate our resources, and we take this out to the community. You host meetings in your districts so that we build toward the budget adoption in May and June. And we have 15 meetings scheduled in each one of the council districts. So just by way of background, our entire budget of about $4 billion is really almost exactly in thirds. On the bottom portion, our special revenue funds are things like the dedicated sales taxes for police and fire hiring. That's about a third of our budget. The enterprise funds, the right-hand slice, is a little more than a third, and that's aviation, water, sewer, and those departments and enterprises that are funded by user fees of people who specifically use that. And then what we give the most attention to in terms of our budgeting discussions with the public is the general fund, and it gets the most attention because it has the things that people see directly every day: parks, libraries, neighborhoods, streets, and police and fire, and those public safety issues. So it's funded from general tax revenue, and it provides those services that build a broad community. In these areas, just to remind us, in the general fund in 2018-19 is projected to be about $1.3 billion. 44% of that is for police, and if I can get there we go, 24% for fire, and if we put our court and our prosecutor and our public defender in there, 72% of our general fund budget is allocated to public safety and criminal justice, which I think reflects a significant priority of the city. Then the other things that are in the general fund: parks, our information technology is there, our library department, and then, as you see, everything else that we do in support of our general fund comes from the other 17%. As we look at this year's trial budget, first and foremost, it preserves the services that are important to the community. There we go. It also provides, to Councilman Williams's point, increased funding for our technology infrastructure, our vehicle infrastructure, and our building maintenance infrastructure in the general fund. When we think about those things, they are largely also related to public safety. I think Jeff told me $8 million of our $13 million vehicle replacement budget is for police and fire vehicles, which makes sense because those are our biggest fleets and some of our heaviest equipment. Our technology investment supports things like the police dispatch, the fire dispatch. Also included in our trial budget is the third year of our labor contracts, and this year represents a 1.3% compensation restoration that completes the 3-year cycle of this labor contract that got our city employees restored back to where they were 10 years ago at the beginning of the recession. We have continued hiring in police and fire, and you'll hear more, but we do want to note that we are actively seeking firefighters and police officers, and particularly in police, we have a lot of positions to fill, and so we're looking for that. This budget also includes the creation of that the council did earlier, of a public safety pension stabilization fund, which is $25 million of savings from this year went into that fund. So in the future, we have a sort of a shock absorber as we continue to monitor the public safety pensions particularly. And then finally, as part of this budget, due to strong property value growth and a vibrant economy, the property tax rate is projected to float down from 216 to 214, providing funding for our bond indebtedness, but also for our general fund services. So now I'll hand the presentation to our Budget and Research Director, Jeff Barton. I want to thank him and his staff for the terrific job, thank our departments who've been here working hard on this, and all of our employees to meet the challenge you've set for us to have a balanced budget. And so Jeff will now walk us through some more specific detail. Mayor, then we'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much.
Jeff?
Mr. Barton.
Mayor, members of the council, so we'll start off by giving you kind of a comparison and an overview, comparing 18-19's proposed budget to the current year's adopted budget. And we'll first start with our resources. And as we discussed at length last month when we did our 5-year forecast, those resources include everything from our general fund sales taxes to our state shared revenue, VLT, interest, recoveries, all those good things, as well as our fund balance. And so you'll see, based on this slide, next year's resources are expected to be about $32 million more than the current fiscal year. And what I'll do is to emphasize and just to help you understand where that's coming from, about 90% of total resources come from general fund revenues. And so if you were to refer to your report that we issued, Attachment D, which I believe is in page 33 of your packet, you'll see that approximately $18 million of that $32 million increase, or 1.6%, is due to general fund revenue increases. So the revenue increase, and I know Councilman Waring likes to ask this question a lot, we've got about 1.6% growth for overall general fund revenue. So we're not way out there this time around. The other $13 million or so really comes from transfers. So those are, again, we've talked in depth about like our central service allocation. That's where our enterprise funds pay for their fair share of the general fund. So that's accounting for the rest of that. When we get to expenditures, you'll see that our expenditures right now, they're about $29 million over our current year adopted budget. And I'll walk you through some areas as to why that is the case, but for right now, I just want to show it to you that way. And you see that those expenditure forecasts for next year are about $2.9 million less than our resources. So that's the surplus that we're here to talk to you about, and that's what our trial budget is largely based on. So as we start talking about the changes from this year to next. Pension costs. We've talked about pension at length over the past couple of months. So again, we'll continue to keep our eyes on pension, but I think we've had a very in-depth discussion about pension. The other piece, as Ed mentioned, the final year of our employee labor concessions. So next year, employees will receive the final portion, that 1.3%. Of the total 4.2% that was restored. That happens July 1st of 2018. Also, increased funding for technology. Ed mentioned that, so we're adding additional funds in to address our technology. A couple of specific projects. We've got FireCAD in the CIP. We've also got a server modernization project in the IT department. That server modernization project is vitally imperative to IT because it's basically the backbone of all of our city technology infrastructure. We also have the replacement of the prosecutor's case management system. That's a 20-year-old legacy system that needs to be replaced. On vehicles, we're replacing $13 million worth of general fund vehicles next fiscal year, and we anticipate to do that for the next few years. And as Ed mentioned, the public safety departments will receive about $8 million of that funding. The last few years, we've only been replacing about $8 million worth of vehicles in the general fund, so this is a $5 million increase. And then on building maintenance, what we've reserved and set aside is an additional $7 million for that building maintenance to kind of follow up with, what some of the comments that Councilwoman Williams had mentioned. Also, the 2016 Fire Safer Grant. So Fire got a grant in 2016 that funds 32 firefighters. The general fund cost or the match for that is about $6 million. This budget reserves $6 million for that as well, so we don't have to go looking for it in the upcoming budget years. And also the $2.9 million in proposed additions, which we'll talk about now. So this budget proposes $2.9 million in general fund additions that address 7 key or critical community priorities, which include public safety, neighborhoods, homelessness, tree and shade, arts and culture, library hours, and the census. And we'll walk through each one of those now in a little bit more detail. And we'll start with public safety and police. So as the city manager mentioned, this budget allows and affords police the funding that is required for them to continue hiring to reach that sustainable goal of 3,125. To put that in context, the department is currently at about 2,940 positions, so this is a net increase of about 180 positions that should hit the streets in the next few months or by the end of next fiscal year, hopefully. In addition to that, this budget, with the $2.9 million that's available, we propose $510,000 in proposed additions for police, and these come in 2 key areas. First and foremost, adding 5 civilian positions to support the police department's Crime Gun Intelligence Center. And what these positions will do is they will examine ballistics material. They will, to steal some of the chief's thunder, this will take the trigger pullers off the street faster. This allows the police department to solve crimes faster and to deal with backlogs. It's also important to mention and emphasize that the police department has also been designated as an ATF regional testing facility, and this goes a long way towards propping that up as well. Secondly, as you know, since 2010, when we stopped hiring and during the depths of the recession, we stopped hiring police officers, but at the same time, we cut a lot of those support staff positions to kind of help balance the budget. These 13 positions that we're proposing adding into public records, they need them to keep up with their existing workload. And so we're able to do that with this funding. In fire, also in public safety category, again, the budget provides fire the resources they need to continue to hire in order to maintain the staffing count that's required by SAFER. And I'd like to emphasize that, we've been talking about that sustainable number in fire is about 1615. During the duration of this SAFER grant, they will actually be about 1654. And so that $6 million helps toward keeping that SAFER grant number at where we need it to be. In addition, we're proposing $342,000 in proposed additions for fire. The first addition is actually a civilianization effort that was recommended by the fire chief. So this is taking 5 vacant captain positions and 1 vacant battalion chief and converting them into 6 firefighter positions. Those sworn supervisory positions, from what I understand and what's been communicated to us, they were performing more administrative type work. So by converting them to firefighters, we're able to send these positions back to the field, which will ultimately help them with their field duties and their field responsibilities and hopefully have some impact on response times. In addition to that, using some of that savings that we get when we reallocate those positions, we're adding 8 civilian positions to enhance the fire department's inspection program. So again, this also follows some of the feedback that we saw as a result of the Burton Bar incident, but these positions will facilitate fire's inspection program. Based on information that we've got from fire, that unit performs about 6,000 inspections per year for fire code type things. With these 8 positions, it's expected that they could increase that capacity by 20%, so almost another 1,000 inspections that they could do on an annual basis. And we've got the link there also for those that are interested in a career with the fire department. The next area that we're addressing with this proposed budget is homelessness, specifically $728,000 in additions for homelessness. The first area is adding 2 navigator teams and the administrative support needed to support the Phoenix Cares program. Based on the information that we've reviewed, these positions will allow these 2 departments to actually serve about 360 more cases per year, and they will increase the number of people that actually get placed with homes from 10% to about 20%. So a pretty significant investment there with this program. In addition to that, we're adding 2 flatland park rangers that will allow the Parks Department to enhance their ability to enforce park regulations. This increases our total park ranger count to 79. At their peak, the department was at 81, and this makes 9 flatland park rangers. In neighborhoods, this is something also that I've heard you talk about for many, many months. We're proposing to add $235,000 in proposed additions for the Structured Sober Living Home Licensing Program. Specifically, adding 2 positions to city clerk. These positions will be responsible for the administrative licensing aspect of the program. There'd be no impact to the general fund for this because the cost of these positions would be recovered through the fees. However, we do need to add 5 positions, which end up being 2 teams for the Neighborhood Services Department that will be responsible for conducting those inspections and enforcing the actual regulations. Based on the information that we've seen relative to the data, it's estimated that they'll perform about 400 inspections per year and respond to as many as 240 inspection complaints or violations on an annual basis. Tree and shade is our next area, so we're proposing $450,000 in tree and shade master plan enhancements or efforts. Specifically, this adds the resources necessary to add about 750 trees per year. And it's not just the trees, it's the infrastructure that goes with the trees. The irrigation system, making sure that those trees, we don't just plant them and they die right away. So that's very important. So again, this goes a long way to enhancing and reducing our efforts for the urban heat island effect. And next area, arts and culture. So we're proposing to add $189,000 in additions for the arts and culture program. Number 1, adding a project manager to oversee the development and the site selection of the Latino Cultural Center, which is a very high priority for the community, and it was also included in the 06 bond program. And also adding $30,000 to the arts grant program. This actually restores the arts grant programming to pre-recession levels, which is also something that we've heard about every year as we go out to the community. Library hours is our next area. We propose $295,000 in additions for the library department. Specifically, following the closure of Burton Bar, weekend or Sunday hours were added to Yucca, Century, Harmon, and Ocotillo libraries. This budget proposes that those hours remain after Burton Bar opens later this summer. And next and finally for the general fund is census. We started talking about census a few months ago as we were doing our budget presentations. This budget proposes $150,000 in additions for the Census 2020 efforts. This includes adding one temporary position to help facilitate that process and $50,000 in contractual support to ensure that all Phoenix residents are counted. To put some context in this, some of my staff recently did some research. We estimate currently that for every resident that's counted, the city of Phoenix receives about $500 between state shared revenue and federal funding that is based on population. So if you were to apply that to our entire population, that's about $816 million on an annual basis that we would receive to make sure our residents are counted. So $150,000 seems like a very small investment for $816 million. Next, we move over to the general fund, and our non-general fund, Our non-general fund additions focus on two areas. Number one, responding to community growth and also maintaining our transportation infrastructure. First, in planning and development, we propose to add $1.7 million in proposed additions, specifically 18 positions to address their current workload demands, which reflect zoning and plan review activities. To put this into some context, I've put together some slides or some information with Alan's help. So pre-recession, the planning department staffing was about 669, and their workload was about 123,000 customers per year. Councilman Stark knows this very well. At the depths of the recession, that staffing level was reduced to 253 staff, and their workload dropped to 70,000 a year. Last year, with 329 staff, they served 110,000 people, or customers. Next year, with these additions, they'll be at about 391 staff, and they'll serve just over 113,000 customers. So again, you see that their workload is back to where it was almost pre-recession, but their staffing is nowhere near that. So that's a testament to Alan's work as well as your work with redefining our development process and streamlining that and using technology to work faster and quicker and more efficient. In streets, this proposed budget proposes $895,000 in additions using AHER funds, specifically adding 30 positions to facilitate the street department's $725 million capital program. And that capital program focuses on the following types of projects: ADA compliance, bikeways and pedestrian walkways, drainage, major streets and bridges, storm sewers, street lighting, street maintenance, traffic calming, and traffic signals. So following today's presentation, we start to go out to the community and we get to hear the feedback from the community and what's important to them. So April 2nd is our first budget hearing. They conclude on April 17th. All of those hearings, as you know, are videotaped. The minutes are transcribed and submitted to you on a weekly basis. So for those that can't participate, you can also submit comments to us via email at phoenix.gov/budget, and we'll make sure that we get all that commentary into the minutes for you as well. Following those hearings, the next steps, we come back with the city manager's proposed budget on May 8th. Then on May 22nd, we have the first formal action from the council, which is the council budget decision on May 22nd. Then we go through our legal adoption process on June 6th, June 20th, and then on July 5th, we have our property tax adoption. And that is our budget process in a nutshell. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about the
All right, thank you very much. So again, this is our city manager's preliminary recommendation. We haven't yet heard from the public, and that's the obvious next step, and we'll have a chance to obviously thoroughly debate this proposed budget, make any changes at the time that the mayor and council have a chance to have added, if you will, at the end, at the conclusion of all of the budget hearings. But at this time, any preliminary thoughts or comments by members of this council? Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank the city manager and Jeff Barton for being very responsive to some of the feedback that the council has been giving. One thing I think we unanimously agree at the city council is that pension is a real priority for ours, and this budget shows that it is a real priority. The commitment to the pension stabilization fund is 8.5 times the general fund surplus, so that is where we are putting money this year as the top priority. Also continues to show that public safety is our overall top priority for the city of Phoenix. Homelessness being up about 60% is probably our top social services priority, and there's significant investment in that area. One thing that I hear from my constituents a lot is that they'd like us to focus a little bit more on cleanups, particularly around encampments, that there's some areas that are impacted over and over again. Many of those are near the campus, and those residents, businesses are providing a service, whether they like it or not, to the rest of us and are highly impacted. And my feeling is that we ought to do more to support them. It's really hard to hear from some of the local businesses and residents some of their stories about the impacts. It is also equally hard to hear from individuals experiencing homelessness, so I don't want to in any way say that we should not take that seriously and invest additional resources. But as we are working to end homelessness, we also need to make sure we take care of the people who are impacted most directly by it. So that's a priority. One thing I hear incredibly often now, particularly from parents, is they want the city to look at school safety. It's hard to hear from parents who say that after Parkland they're nervous dropping off their kids at school. It's also hard to hear from our young people that they don't feel safe at school. We do not run the school district, but we are very lucky to have the police department, and I know our chief is paying particular interest to this issue. It's one that I would like to challenge our staff to see what we can do to be part of the solution, and I suspect as we go out in the community, we'll hear more often about that. I think we're making a lot of smart decisions that will also help that particular issue in this budget, so I don't want to say that we're not already doing a lot, but our assistant city manager shared we've had more than 200 incidents, some false calls, some new guns, actually at our schools. This is very much on the minds of our residents, and we ought to do our part to address it. Want to thank Councilwoman Stark for her leadership, in particular on the sober living homes. It's a significant commitment in this budget. Credit to the entire council, but to Councilwoman Stark in particular. So a lot to celebrate in this budget, but still a lot more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, it's just a preliminary recommendation. Any comments at this time? Obviously, we'll have plenty of time to hear from the public, most importantly, and then to add in for later dates. So without any other comments, there be no further items on this agenda. We are adjourned.